What's going on, Tamers? It's me, Guy in the kitchen, cooking up Terriermon decks because the new Double Typhoon Advanced deck just released for Japan and the rest of Asia. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you want to know more, I did a full breakdown of the deck and how it plays over in another video, so check that out on the channel. Also, if you want to know more about what's actually included with the Advanced deck, I'll be doing a full unboxing video for that very soon, so make sure you're subscribed to know exactly when that goes live. But enough about Terriermon. We are in our 8th week of the BT15 Exceed Apocalypse meta over here in Japan and the rest of Asia. And if you watched the mega report that I did covering weeks 5, 6, and 7 last week, then you'll know that we're in a bit of a lull at this point, just because the second stage regionals for Japan have concluded. And as a result of that heavy competitive season, players are starting to rest and take a break these next couple weeks. This has led to less events happening overall, as well as just less turnout for those events that are happening. Keeping that in mind, I think the theme for today's video is going to be less about finding hyper competitive decks and more about some of the ideas that players are cooking up in the offseason. With that preamble out of the way, let's take a look at some event results, a couple of key takeaways, and a close look at some of the decks that topped over the course of last week. So diving into the results, like I said before, you'll notice that there were less events overall here, decks only reaching the champion level rather than the mega levels you're so commonly used to. And also, again, I wouldn't take too much stock in the actual placements of the decks here. I think it's more important to see what decks are just on this list overall to see what people are playing. Now, I know I'm about to contradict what I literally said like 10 seconds ago, but I do think there is a small trend of Leviamon decks upwards in the past couple of weeks. I'm not sure if that changes as a result of the restriction list getting updated and less Apocalypse overall and more Anubismon, and Leviamon taking advantage of the Anubismon playing Digimon by effects, or if it's just people figuring out better lines for the deck that we hadn't previously seen before. One of the reasons I say that is because looking at some of the lists this week, there was some really cool ideas floated around for Leviamon, and I'm definitely going to show off some of those because I don't think it's anything we've seen before. Another deck that really surprised me this past week was Leomon. I feel like Bloom Quartz shines so brightly that it's really easy to miss the power of the other green decks out there just because Bloom Quartz is so strong. But Leopardmon and Leomon aren't bad decks. It's just that Bloom Quartz is so good sometimes it's easy to miss the other decks out there. If you watched my live stream last week, we actually covered a Numemon deck list that I didn't cover in the actual meta report video. And it's really cool to see this deck performing again this week as well. It feels like Ukkomon really has been the bump that this deck needed to see a little bit more use. Actually, speaking of Ukkomon, last week I talked about how Ukkomon has kind of brought back Rookie Rush into the game. And I mentioned that at Locals I actually played against a red variant of Ukkomon. It was actually pretty cool. And lo and behold, in last week's results, I found that list. So we're going to take a look at that as well. And so to wrap up, I'll say it one more time because I think it's worth repeating here. I wouldn't take too much stock in the actual placement of the decks on this list, but the fact that the decks are on this list overall is just a good sign. So the first deck list that I want to look at here is actually going to be the Leviamon I talked about before. I mentioned that Leviamon was doing some neat little innovations, and this is just one that I hadn't seen before, so I thought it was worth sharing. So this deck actually masquerades on the lower end as a Beelzemon list with lots of the Impmon cards as well as Wizardmon cards that you come to know and love, or hate depending on what side of Beelzemon you were on. This helps set up cards like your 7th Lightning as well as your Leviamon X Antibody pretty easily. So what I think is so cool about this deck specifically is the combo potential for the Ai and Mako Tamer with the white option card, blue card. Where in the past, blue card wasn't that useful because you're paying 3 to essentially gamble onto a Digivolve, hoping that the next 5 cards or somewhere in the next 5 cards is something you can use. However, because Ai and Mako lets you stack cards on top of your deck whenever you Digivolve, the idea here for the deck is to Digivolve into your level 5 and then use the Ai and Mako Tamer to rest the Leviamon on your deck and then play the blue card to end your turn, and then you can just Digivolve into your Leviamon for 3 cost. And because you've guaranteed him to be on the top of the deck, the blue card will always hit. Another really cool idea for this deck is the fact that they use Black War Growlmon. Now, he has the Digiburst 3 effect, where normally you couldn't actually use that effect, I guess in the past, unless you pulled it out from Raising and had the level 2. Because this deck runs so many of the X Antibody cards on the lower end, so you can actually get this Digiburst 3 effect pretty easily. With that, he lets you play another Digimon on board, probably something like the Impmon down here to grab something from the trash and return it to your hand. And once you actually go into your Leviamon, you can swing with Leviamon and then use the inheritance effect from the Black War Growlmon here to delete the level 3 and then unsuspend and swing again. And because Leviamon has multiple security attacks, that's pretty scary. And it only gets worse if you have a Leviamon X because he's got security attack +2. I think a lot of lists in the past have been focused on using things like the Violet Memory Boost as well as the Wisdom Training cards to kind of reduce the cost of Leviamon. But I think this is a really cool idea that's been unexplored so far, using things like the blue card and the Ai and Mako Tamer to stack your deck up to get really cheap Digivolves. The next list that I want to take a look at is going to be the red Ukkomon list that I talked about before. Like we've seen before, you've got 4 copies of the Ukkomon and Rui Tamer, so you can quickly cycle out Digimon from the raising area to the battle area very quickly and gain memory off of it. One of the issues that Rookie Rush decks tend to have is that they get really low on resources, and one way that this deck tries to circumvent that is by using the BT15 Mufasamon card, where once per turn one of your Digimon attacks, you can draw a card. This helps to replenish your hand and make sure that things don't get too low, and getting multiple copies of Sky on the board are really good. And the rest of the deck is filled up by mostly red variants of Floodgates to really hamper your opponent's game plans. Things like the Celermon, the Gotsumon, as well as the Gaussmon. Gaussmon being a really cool one here because it actually kind of buffs itself once you have multiple copies on board, so it makes the Rookie Rush a little bit more sustainable. You also see a couple copies of the Otamamon. A 5,000 DP Digimon for 2 costs is pretty hard to ignore. You're probably never going to be Digivolving into this guy from raising unless you're really hard up for card draw. And with such high stats, he has that potential to live during security swings, which means he can fight another day. For all of you card gamers out there who actually know how to count, if you did some math here, then you notice that this is only 42 cards. The last 8 cards this person has decided not to reveal. I mean, Rookie Rush is pretty straightforward, however. So if I had to speculate on what some of these cards were, I'd probably guess Crimson Blaze being one of them, maybe a Fireball to get card draw as well as destruction. You can choose there. And then finally, probably something to get rid of big Digimon. Again, Apocalypse and those other level 6s are running around pretty rampantly right now, and so you have to have a way or an answer for those cards. Again, those are just my ideas. If you guys have any ideas about what those 8 cards could be, put them down in the comments below. And the last list that I want to take a look at today is going to be the Leomon list. This one came out of Taiwan as a nice little added bonus. If you want to watch the finals for the tournament this deck actually won in, you can do so on the DIGITOU channel in 4K. I'll put a link to that in the description below for this video, and I highly recommend you check it out because it was a very good game. Also, with EX5 on the horizon right now for the English-speaking side of the game, this is a deck you can pretty much build almost exclusively using the EX5 cards. I mean, there's a couple like BT14 cards and some of the training cards in there as well, but for the most part, EX5 is like where most of the cards here come from. You notice there's typically 2 kinds of cards here. There's like black, green, and then yellow, green. Most of the black, green cards focus on de-digivolving whenever they're destroyed, and the yellow cards focus on giving your opponent's Digimon minus 2k. And then they all have this, I think the effect has actually been named in English as Fortitude rather than Indomitable. And most cards in this deck have the Fortitude keyword, where if they're destroyed and they had sources, they come back to the field without any sources. That's particularly the reason you see the 1 copy of the X antibody option card here, because you can take maybe like your level 6, and when it comes back with Fortitude, you can then just stack up the X antibody option, even though there are no X antibodies in this deck, and it'll be able to come back 1 more time as a result of having that 1 source card. The heavy Leomon here is more offensive focused, being able to unsuspend itself or bottom deck cards, depending on if your opponent has a 4,000 or lower Digimon on the board. And the Bancho Leomon here is more focused on debuffing, giving some things like security attack -1 as well as minus DP. The option cards for this deck are pretty scary. I think the basic value option cards of the training cards as well as the memory boosts are pretty standard. The removal options for this deck though are very scary. Things like the flashy Botch Punch, which could potentially win you a game by resting a Digimon and then giving something minus 12,000 and letting one of your Bancho Digimon attack. And on the other side you have cards like Heaven's Judgment, where because this deck runs 3 different colors, you can potentially give something minus 6k 4 times over the course of a turn. And again, if you want to see this deck in action, you can take a look at the description below and go to the DIGITOU channel and watch their finals game. Also, shout out to the DIGITOU people over in Taiwan for putting out great content. And with that, we're going to bring week 8 of the BT15 Exceed Apocalypse meta report to a close. Again, with the lack of large scale events, I think it's been a fun little experiment to dive in to see what some of the really cool ideas people are cooking up. Personally, it's been really cool to watch decks like Labiamon and Ukkomon take shape and then so slowly change over the course of this set. And so I kind of want to see what people are cooking up in the next couple of weeks. Speaking of the future, it'd also be really cool to see how Double Typhoon, the new advanced deck, affects the game overall. Getting some of the really cool green cards that Lopmon and Terriermon now provide. I don't know if you folks have any questions about anything I talked about or didn't talk about, feel free to put them in the comments below. Additionally, if there are any decks that you want me to show off during my stream later this week, feel free to put those in the comments as well. Anyways, folks, I'm going to get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.